Hello and welcome to the fifth and final episode of GameCube Prison for the season. I'm Ludwig Kitzman for Games Radar Plus, and this is a retrospective series in which we make a case for the GameCube as a wonderful home for the weird. We're going out with the GameCubiest of games, Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, and with me today is Anthony John Agnello.
Man, Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles could not be more GameCube-y if it tried. The Final Fantasy series was born on Nintendo consoles, but it had been the exclusive domain of Sony since Square jumped to the PlayStation in the late 90s. When Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles came out in 2004, it had literally been 10 years since the Final Fantasy series was on a Nintendo machine. But rather than return to that classic RPG style of games like Final Fantasy VI, producer Akitoshi Kawazu decided to use every damn feature the GameCube had to make something unique. Multiplayer-focused, Crystal Chronicles was a story-light dungeon crawler that let 4 players wander a blighted countryside, fighting goblins and other freaks. Here's the thing, though. You couldn't just play with controllers.
Right, if there was one thing that served as a barrier to truly taking advantage of Crystal Chronicles, it was that each of the 4 players had to bring a Game Boy Advance, which was Nintendo's follow-up to the Game Boy Color at the time. And each of these had to be connected to the GameCube with a link cable sold separately. So instead of a controller, every person would have a D-pad and face buttons, shoulder buttons, and their own screen. So my question is, why would you go to a BYOG event like this?
Well, constricting as that entire hard setup is and was, the ideas for facilitating cooperation were really sound. Crystal Chronicles really wanted to emphasize teamwork. Everybody's screen on the Game Boy Advance lets them manage their character and all that, but it also randomly assigns each player a specific role when they go into a new stage. So one person has a map with all the treasure chests on it, the other person has a map with all the enemies on it, and say a third person has, a full layout map that actually will let them know where the exit is. Everybody needs to be communicating the entire time. The game even found a story-based solution for forcing everybody to stay on a single screen on the television that they're playing on. Unfortunately, this led to one of the primary complaints against Crystal Chronicles. You had to carry around this crystal bucket. The whole point in the game is to carry around this crystal bucket, collect dew to put in the bucket, and protects people. The problem is when you're carrying around the bucket and you're protecting this field, protecting everybody from poisonous miasma covering the countryside, the person carrying it can't do anything else. They're on bucket duty.
I feel like these buckets would do really well in Los Angeles.
Luddy, no amount of crystal dew can help Los Angeles.
Okay, so I appreciate the emphasis on teamwork because it's not often that you see a game truly built around that. Usually it's a fun option in other kinds of gameplay and it can be shallow as a result. But at the same time, it can't feel good being the bucket carrier because I don't think you can do anything else.
Yeah, nobody really wants to be the bucket goon, at least in theory, but when you're actually playing and you fall into the rhythm of the game, Crystal Chronicles is just awesome. And there is actually a rhythm to moving around the bucket. You don't want to always have one person carrying it around. You move in short bursts and stop in specific areas to fight, and then one person carries it when you're exploring, and you don't need to be fighting or doing anything active. The thing is finding that rhythm is really difficult. Not only do you need partners with the right gear, but Crystal Chronicles is a really long game, and it takes a long time before you start to see the best things that it has to offer. When you do find that rhythm, and you've been adventuring with the same people for a couple of dozen hours, the feeling of intimacy in Crystal Chronicles is not like anything else. The art, the music, the weird, largely implied story of what happened to this place all sort of slowly emerges into an adventure that feels less like the melodrama of a Final Fantasy VII and more like you're experiencing this long life on the road in an impossible place.
Do you think that the extreme requirements of playing this game, which is only tangentially like other Final Fantasy games, do you think it's worth it if it means that it dooms the game to obscurity? Because you do have to buy a lot of hardware, a lot of separate hardware, to truly appreciate the game at its best. Do you think that the work that you end up doing for all of that to essentially carry the bucket pays off in the end?
Well, it didn't really pay off in the end for Square. They ended up making a bunch of Crystal Chronicles games after this one failed to find an audience, shifting over to the Nintendo DS and the Wii. Crystal Chronicles Echoes of Time, which allowed crossplay between Wii and DS, was even more awkward to set up than the GameCube and all the Game Boy Advances, and the same thing was true of the Nintendo DS game Rings of Fate. And, even with all that awkwardness aside, neither game felt as, truly lush and strange as the original GameCube Crystal Chronicles. The only time the series ever really came close to the levels of the original again was on its Wii exclusive.
And I will go on record to say that I'm a big fan of Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, the Crystal Barrier, despite its crystal-heavy title. What else can you tell me about this game?
Well, as much as it wasn't worth it for Square, it was definitely worth it for players. Crystal Chronicles actually made teamwork matter for a group. And Final Fantasy is a series known for controlling a team of characters, your party, but you're usually doing it by yourself, and Crystal Chronicles let you do it with other people over a long period of time. It's the only time the series lets you build those feelings of camaraderie that's so central to so many Final Fantasy stories, but do it in real life. The investment that you put in the gear to play it, in the time it takes to play it, in the patience to actually let the game unfold, it's steep, but anyone who's gone the distance with Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles knows just how freaking special it is.
Right, that story of a team coming together is usually explicitly written in the narrative of these games, but they don't actually reflect on how you play them. So that sounds like a really important distinguishing mark for Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles. That does it for the first season of GameCube Prison. Check out the full series on our YouTube page, and for more console game analysis like this, come check us out on gamesradar.com. Until next time, something witty.